Right.
That
Smearing of the scale with the thumb, right? Isn't that the line?
Yeah.
I think that's what it is. All right, we're gonna start by introducing for all the new people. What we like to do with the discussions is that really any question goes. It's an opportunity for any Jewish question, not politics, unless that's connected to Judaism. But any question that might have been on your mind or something that comes up from the discussions, it's a great opportunity. If I don't know the answer, I have Google at my fingertips. But if I don't know the answer, I'll research it and maybe come back. We can, it's all about, no, it's in English, but it's all about parameters,
Okay.
But I'm joking about that. I will, I'll research it. Like if it's something I don't know, I'm happy to research it and either send it as an email afterwards, which we've done in the past. And then of course I always bring a subject just in case. That's my line. So we'll go, I think it's good though that we go around the room just introducing ourselves. So Alice, we'll start with you.
Alice Cox, I'm from Kalamazoo, Michigan. Married to Steve.
That's good. Also from Kalamazoo.
Yes, yes.
I'm Rick Landy. We moved here 3 years ago, so we're here permanent.
Philly though, just to put the,
From Philly, yeah. Philly area,
are you an Eagles fan?
a little bit, yeah.
I forget.
Eagles and Arizona Cardinals, so.
Nice.
Ethel, small speedway from Buffalo Grove, Illinois, suburb of Chicago.
Robert Speedway from the same place.
I'm Rita, I'm from North Swanston, not too far from here.
Lou Rich, I was here for about 20 years and then I left. And a year and a half later,
Are you moving back or you're just,
Right back.
oh, really? So it's not a visit this time.
it's a bit right now to figure out where I would live if I did do this, but I think I'm gonna.
Wow.
come back.
Where did you leave? Where did you go to?
Omaha,
Oh.
back to.
That's home for, that's where he,
For 50 years.
wow.
Did you know Rabbi Brian Stoller?
Now, how recently was he there?
He was there, I'd say in the last 8 years or so.
Yeah,
He
I
was
was here for 20.
Yeah, he was on that campus that they built with a mosque and a church and a
Yeah.
Reformed synagogue.
Temple Israel.
Yeah.
Yeah. You
I think
know
he's-
what that is? It's right where the Highland Golf Course was.
So what does that mean?
I lost the golf course.
Because when he was installed there, he came from our synagogue and he went there. He was an associate rabbi, he became the full-time rabbi.
So
And I
the
think
rabbi
he's
out
left
there-
very pleased.
Was he a good rabbi?
He was very good. Brian Stoller is very brilliant.
Nice.
He was,
We would only want to hear good things. It just reminds me of a joke, but I'll tell you the joke after. We want to get,
I'm from New York.
Oh.
The Bronx.
nice.
Then I lived in New Jersey, and the last place was Lakewood. And I'm here at 40 years
Oh, wow.
with my 3 daughters. And my husband, he passed away. And I love it here.
40 years. Wow. Well, you could be welcoming all of us.
So I never had, we were kosher, but I never went to Hebrew school or anything. My sister, she went to a yeshiva, but somehow I didn't have any, we were kosher and all their holidays, but I didn't have an education. So here I go to Phoenix, Arizona, and I worked at Maricopa County Human Resources, the only Jew in the office.
Oh, you better know all the answers then, right? Right, exactly.
Jew, only in the movies. So I said, I gotta do something. So I took every class I could find and got certificates. I even the Chabad in Chandler, I know him.
Rabbi
But
Deitch.
Yeah, he was a little kid. Now. So, but let's, and some other ones.
So do you have any questions left or you got them all answered? Do you have all your questions answered now or?
It's never ending.
Right.
Yeah.
But the only thing I don't know is, I don't know any Hebrew. You know, I know about the history and I keep learning.
All right. So the goal is to learn Hebrew.
Hebrews,
That's your-
when you get someone to teach, it's pretty easy to learn.
You think so?
Compared to,
Much
compared to
easier.
English.
Not for me.
Hebrew.
Well,
I just know all the people who tell me how difficult it is. You know why? I'll explain. If you learn whatever language you've learned, whether you're coming from Italian, Latin, doesn't make a difference. You're using the same letters.
What'd you say? Yeah.
You're using the same letters as English.
Yes.
So to learn English and to read English is easier than to learn Hebrew, which is a totally new alphabet. We do have vowels, which makes it easier kind of to read once you learn it, but like you gotta know the letters. It's like a totally.
If you grow up with the language and then you spell out the letters, you know what it is. I could spell out the letters. I could read Hebrew like a first grader. I don't know what it is. It means nothing to me.
That's why you use on JVS, the Hamptons, when they do Torah on Shabbat, they put what they're saying in
underneath it?
English.
I will tell you though, there is, okay, so Hebrew is just like Latin, that there is a root
Yeah.
to every single word. So it is like I watch how my kids are learning it in school and I didn't have the opportunity to learn it the way they're learning it. They get a book of what's called Sharashim, which is roots for words.
Like
And so
Latin.
exactly. And so their job is to identify the root of the word and they should be able to translate, then you learn the prefix, suffix.
Like I learned,
So it's their school, so I don't even know.
isn't that?
Yeah, but I did not, I never got that opportunity.
Isn't that
I learned it the old fashioned way.
from your dad?
No, it was also in school, but they just didn't have all the new like age, people who are like thinking, well, how do we teach this better? So I think also even in like Talmud study, identify the question, the answer. I see how my son's learning it. I didn't get that in school with a worksheet to kind of help you with that. We did have worksheets, but it wasn't the same.
Steve has a different grade who taught you Hebrew.
Well, our teachers were Holocaust survivors, so they spoke very little English. And my class had 7 boys, and that's it. I
So
mean,
you
there
had a
were no-
lot of attention.
Well, we just made life miserable.
Oh, I got you. So you didn't learn, you're saying.
No, we-
He went to Barnes.
Teach my daughter. I got my 2 daughters. They learned in New Jersey and here and Israel. They all went to Israel. And my daughter teaches right here the Holocaust. Yeah, she went a couple of times through the synagogue. They sent her to Israel.
She's teaching in a public school or she's teaching like Sunday school? Religious school? Is that the word?
Reformed synagogue with John Linder.
Oh, yeah, Solo.
My granddaughter was his friend.
Okay, so then we have to interrupt you. We want to hear what question you didn't get answered yet.
What?
I said, we want to know what question you haven't had answered yet from all your studies. So that's what I want to hear. Like, what's the most pressing question?
So I'm not over there.
Oh, please. Don't say that. You're going to scare everyone else.
You gotta go back here,
and learn.
yeah.
All right, so now I'm gonna interrupt. I want to hear a question. Do you have a question? Oh, you even wrote down a question?
This is interesting because it's about like, Leonardo da Vinci. I read the book.
Okay.
This is, it's something new, it's interesting, and monument men.
So wait, there's a question that you have from the book Monument Men? A question. All right, we'll have to talk about Monument Men later. That's yeah,
Saved.
the arts, yeah. I don't know any Jewish questions on that yet. You'll have to, if you come up with a question, I know what the movie's about.
Well, I went to Italy and saw, Florence, you know, all this. Yeah.
All right, well, when you come up with a question, let us know. We're gonna move around the room now. Go for it, Rita.
So it's a little early for this question, but, a friend asked me and I said I'd ask you. So, in the book of Esther, she.
Oh, it's not so early. I know why you're saying that, but like, it's the next holiday. It's gonna be mid-March, I think.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
She gets all these accolades upon her for marrying a non-Jew. So why is interfaith marriage still so stigmatized?
Okay, very good question. Just to repeat it, just in case, we do have someone on Zoom, Karen.
Hi, Karen.
So the question was, if you read the story of Esther, we know that Queen Esther is Jewish. She marries King Ahasuerus, who is not Jewish. And I don't know that she gets accolades for that, but I'm repeating the question as you said. That in the Megillah, when we read the story, it's like Queen Esther is, you're the hero, you married a non-Jew, you're saving all the Jews. And so why is it that in the story, it's something celebrated, to quote you, to misquote you, but to quote you. And in real life, when you talk about the Jewish scene today, it is definitely not accepted and still not accepted, even in the modern kind of world that we live in. So 2 points to it. Number one is in the story of Esther, that's never celebrated, meaning it's a fact of the story. And the question is, if a person is forced into a marriage like that, which is how you would look at the Esther story. There is a lot of commentary on this. So I don't want to just say like it's a black and white story. There's a lot of commentary because Jewish law does say that there are 3 mitzvot, 3 commandments, that if you are forced to do them, it's better to die than to do it. There are 3 except, meaning every other commandment in the Torah, it says, do it rather than to be killed. One of the commandments that it says you should be killed rather than to do it is forbidden marriages. So if the Torah forbids a marriage, it says better to be killed than to do it. And so the real question is, if we're going to analyze the story of Esther in a real in-depth commentary type of way, the question is, did Esther do the right thing even by marrying King Ahasuerus? Maybe she should have taken whatever punishment would have come her way for refusing the marriage. So there are a lot of commentaries on this. And if you look at Mordecai's words to his niece, right, I'm going to use Esther as the niece. Right. What does he say? He says, maybe this is the entire purpose of why you were chosen to be the queen, right? Seeing the hand of God in this, that you're in this situation to save the Jews, which means that she didn't necessarily see that on firsthand. And he had to remind her, like, maybe this is why you're there, so you can save us. So there's a lot of commentary on it. And then the question is, I'm giving you more questions than answers. Then the question is, after she saves the Jewish people, maybe then she should divorce him. Because now she's already done the mitzvah and sees the miracle of why she ended up being in her position with the hand of God there. But afterwards, she should have said, listen, sorry, now I know I was here, we're finished. Go find another wife. No, it wouldn't. And then there's like another medrash. I'm just throwing things at you that says that Esther never slept with King Ahasuerus. It was always like a doppelganger, like a demon type of angel that would take her place. Why am I sharing that? Because a lot of commentary struggle with this exact question. So, right. Well, he thought, but we're saying like some holy angel took her place. My point is, those don't go with that answer as the answer. My point of what I'm sharing is the rabbis struggle with your very question, but that doesn't adjust to the modern day question of what is the Jewish take on interfaith marriages, which is the next part of your question. There is a woman that just emailed me yesterday. There's a movie coming out, and it might be but with the Jewish Film Festival here. I don't watch movies in theaters like that, but it's called Sabbath Queen. So if you've heard of it, the person behind the movie, and maybe he's the main kind of character as well, it's a documentary, is a Jewish man who is maybe at a certain point, he's a drag queen. I don't know exactly the story. I quickly watched the trailer to understand what she's talking about. And he argues that we should allow interfaith marriages. So the question is, should we or not? Like if the Torah forbids it, then why today should we? And this is not going into the question of how you should look at somebody who's intermarried. I'm not going into that part. More about on the traditional sense of it. Of course, our job is to love people, encourage them to do another mitzvah, not to say you deserve to be hung or whatever punishment because you did this and that. So we have to keep that in mind in this question. The question is, what should we do traditionally today, knowing that the world keeps changing, but we're connected to a Torah that doesn't change? That's kind of how I'll phrase it. And so how do we look at marriages that would be out of the faith? And so really, I didn't watch this movie, but like the whole time while I'm watching the trailer, because this woman asked me to kind of, she would love to discuss it with me, is like, who should change? Should we change? Or should the Torah change? Or can we say, listen, the Torah has its own value system that is timeless. It doesn't make it easier as you go into situations that don't go with the value system of the modern day era. But if we keep changing the Torah, what will we be left with?
Any commentary in there about the result of a family from that?
Well, so we can go into that, which is exactly what you're saying. Okay, now let's say you did do the interfaith marriage. How do you raise those kids? What does that talk about the future of the Jewish people? But I actually used a different kind of premise if you caught on. My question is, if we keep changing the Torah, what are we left with? And if we keep saying that everything's amenable and we can change it to what makes us feel better, it's always about feeling better, then what is fixed? Just to use it, and then I'll come back to this, just to use on any moral value question, nothing to do with Judaism. If I can change my values today one way because of the wind, tomorrow a different way, then I really don't have a value system. So when we talk about the Torah is giving us a blueprint of how the world works. God created the world, and it says the blueprint or the manual to how the world works in its perfect sense is through the Torah. So that doesn't mean that something won't work the other way. Like I can make an engine turn on, maybe by not following the manual. But if I want it to work at its optimal way, in its best way, then this is the way to do it, by looking in the Torah for us, for Jewish people. What is the correct values and what are the correct guidances and guidelines? So this is not to look down upon someone who chose or ends up doing something different, but this is, let's talk about it in a vacuum without all the other emotions. Is that in a vacuum? Well, if we move the emotions, like if without knowing that a family member fell in love with someone, and just talked about the Torah on its own, we wouldn't have the same conversation. So in that story, this guy has a life that he wants to enjoy and live the way it is, and it doesn't fit within the box. So he says the box is a problem. That's kind of how I looked at the story. Again, I didn't watch his movie, but in the Esther story, you have a very good question. So there was threat of death, right? If she wouldn't show up, she would be killed. And so we don't look at it the same way. And we definitely don't celebrate it, meaning the marriage part. We do acknowledge that it's because she's married to Ahasuerus. But it's not like the day after they say, okay, anyone who wants to marry anyone can marry anyone. They don't do that. So there is definitely, but it's still a very good question. So much so that I share this a lot. Many years ago, when I first started going to what's now known, I don't know what it's called anymore, actually. It's Palazzo, which just changed its name again, but it was called Chris Ridge. I'm walking around Purim time and a lady comes over to me and she says, Rabbi, why was Esther allowed to marry a non-Jew? And so I gave her kind of the same answer. She was forced into the marriage, all the different things that we would answer. And she says, thank you, because she asked her rabbi or whatever synagogue she was going to in Chicago, and the rabbi slapped her across the face for even asking the question. Right? And she said that she never went, no. Well, I don't know, actually. It could have been conservative. It could have been anyone. This is in the 1940s. So she said that she never went back to Jewish anything, which means, and I share this a lot because it made a profound kind of impact on me, which means, think about it. If she was a grandmother then, there's 2 more generations already that are
A lot.
right. Her own self, her kids who had nothing to do with Judaism, and her grandkids because her own kids didn't have anything. So somebody, hopefully at the end of that chain, will come back on their own because they're inspired somewhere. But like that one answer turned off generations. So for me, that's why I really think the discussions are important, because we have questions and we don't get answers. And that could be something that's like a real, I'm going to say, impediment to living Jewishly. And it's like, we should know, first of all, we should know that there aren't always answers, but at least that we should feel safe asking the question.
Wasn't back then, even if you talked about if a child or somebody asked a question about that they thought was unkosher, or, they would
Right.
tell them, that's not kosher. That was the.
So it's funny. I like how you're using that. There's a word I always heard, that akasha, this is in Yiddish, but it's exactly what you're saying. Akasha is treif. A question is not kosher, it's treif.
Yes.
Because people thought that if you question, you're going to lose your faith in God. But really, Judaism says the other way around. Ask a lot of questions, as long as you're asking to learn. If you're asking because you want to throw it away, you're never going to get a satisfactory answer anyways. So for example, in this question, if that person wanted to marry somebody who wasn't Jewish and use that as their question, I'm not going to be able to give any good answer, because that's their question to say why they can. Look, Esther did it. But again, the situation of Esther was not as simple as we would like to think. It was very clear that there was a beauty pageant that was forced. They were picking up women from homes, making them live for a year or whatever it was in I'm going to call it the harem,
Yeah,
right? In the traditional sense of that word, getting them prepared. Right. So there was a forcing part, but should she have died instead of going? That's its own conversation.
But look what she did.
Well, but that's what the question was. That was the question. I will share, if you think about it like this, if we're going to add some extra details here, let's say you're the Jewish woman and they force you into that. Like, why should you die for being forced into the competition, right? You might not get chosen. So you'll lose, 11 months of your year because you got to go through all the processes of preparing you for the pageant. So it's really at the last point where you would even come to the Jewish kind of debate of what you should do in that situation. So again, these are good questions, but the question is not necessarily, we clearly know that wasn't a guidance for the future. It was a guidance for a specific scenario and situation in Jewish history, right?
Okay, so you had said though, if we keep modifying the Torah, then what will we have in the end? And there was a talk previously in which you said that the rabbis decided chicken.
Okay, good question.
And that was
I'll elaborate on that one, just to rephrase the question.
it's meat. I understand it's not like beef.
No, but I'll explain. Okay.
It doesn't have split up into a.
Well, no, hold on. I'll explain. But I'll explain the question and the scenario. So yeah, one second. Let me just finish this one. I'll connect it to that one, and then I'll come to you guys. I know Ethel has a question. You have a question. So hold on. The question that you just kind of followed up with is, if we said that we can't move and change the Torah, then how is it that the rabbis can add on prohibitions? For example, in the Torah, chicken is parov. It is not considered a meat. It is not considered dairy. And the rabbis were the one who said chicken will be treated like meat. Why? So there's a reason. So the rabbis did have, and I'm coming to the answer now. The rabbis did have legislative power not to add on to the Torah, but to protect the Torah. And so what they did was they were afraid that if you ate chicken thinking it's parv, because that's what it was, someone else who doesn't know better and sees you eating chicken with milk, who doesn't know that chicken is not a meat, because chicken and meat, most people put into the same category. They look very similar for whatever reason. Someone might make that mistake and then go and eat meat with milk, a biblical prohibition. So what they did was, like Ethel said, the fence. They added something to protect you. Just like in the United States and in every legislative body, you have a legislative body that will enact laws to protect the people. So we might not like building codes, but they're there to make sure that if there's a fire, you have time to get out or time for the fire department to save you, right? So they might have a 2-hour requirement of how long your walls should be able to withstand fire, or 1 hour. And if it's a larger building with more people, they're going to have even stricter standards. Why? Because they want to protect you. Speed limits to protect you. Seat belts in cars to protect you. Now that they're adding, more every year, you learn more laws that they're legislating, which some people say enough is enough. You're going to have that side of the argument. But in the end of the day, at least we would like to believe, I think all of us would like to believe, that none of those laws are legislated to make our lives miserable. They're there because a scenario happened where somebody was injured or harmed or died in a car accident. So you know what could have saved that person? Another whatever. Let's put that in all cars. Yes, it might be more difficult for life for a manufacturer of vehicles, because now you have so much more restrictions, it costs more money, and vehicle prices are going up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But in the end of the day, it's not to make your life miserable. So that's kind of how I would answer that. Yes.
Oh, let's get back to.
Esther?
Marriage.
Marriage.
Ruth, we have, going to the Pharaoh, putting people in place of power so they can speak to power to benefit Jews.
Okay, so hold on. Ruth converted.
Right, she converted, right, but she wasn't Jewish.
Yeah, but that's a totally different conversation. In Judaism, you can always convert. That's not a question. But Esther, we're talking about the other way around, right?
And also, Jews didn't suffer the way they're suffering after the Holocaust.
So hold on, now time out. So now you have a different question. Maybe intermarriage is the way to fix all of the anti-Semitism. Is that kind of the question you're asking?
Saying is maybe that's why we shouldn't intermarry, because we have to
Procreate?
and have more Jews to.
Maybe that's a good argument, but it's not a good argument. Do you know what I mean?
The other, every family has a non-Jew in their family, and they see we don't have horns, we don't have tails, we're human.
So hold on. I like what you're saying, meaning your argument right now is maybe we should allow it because it exposes Jews to non-Jews in a new way, where they learn that these people are actually not the devil or the this or the that. Meaning if which is kind of the argument that the Reform movement did in the early 1900s, 1906, I think, the Philadelphia Convention, whatever year that was, which was that you should allow Jews, we'll take away the laws of kosher. So this way Jews can eat with non-Jews in restaurants, and it will take away anti-Semitism. It didn't help. Not only that, it made Jews less Jewish. I don't mean that literally, but they didn't know more. They knew less about themselves. Intermarriage, if we're going to go with that argument, I can say, well, wait a second. The kids are no longer going to be living Jewishly. You're one step away from, meaning your argument might work for one generation. It won't work for the next one. So I don't know that that's a good argument at all. I know that it's an argument because we all hear it. It's not a new argument. Right. But if we want to truly do our purpose, which is to, first of all, build communities that affect, I say communities, I mean that in a bigger global community even, where we are a light unto the nations, where we truly make a difference in this world, bringing, I'm using now more spiritual words, godliness into the world, making a perfect world, which brings us to a time which will be of peace, exactly, a messianic era. It's not going to be by changing things. in sense of watering down who we are. We're going to lose more and more of our values from that.
So what are the other two things that we,
From what I mentioned. Okay, so and then we'll come to your question. So I said that there are 3 mitzvot in the Torah that it says better to be killed than to perform them when forced to do it. So for example, we said marriages, and I use the word, I'm using it in a nice way. That would mean it includes rape. If someone puts a gun to my head and says, do X, Y, and Z to that woman, or I will kill you. So it says better to be killed than to perform that act. So that's number 1, but that's a very big category. It could be illegal marriages, and it could also be forced upon things like that. It's easier to say the rape thing because I think most of us can wrap our mind around that easier. Number 2 is murder. If someone comes over to me and says, kill that person or I will kill you, which by the way, this is a great conversation for the hostage conversation today, right? If you give up if we do this trade of 1,000 to 1 or 100 to 1 or whatever it is, is this kind of like the gun at someone's head? Or they're going back. The history has proven they go back to harm Jews, right? So it's kind of in the same window of a conversation, but not the same thing. So again, number 2 was to commit murder, to kill someone or be killed. And it says better to be killed than to kill someone. And number 3 is idolatry. If someone says, bow down to that idol or worship that God, or I will kill you, kind of dying at the stake, better to die than to perform that act of idolatry. Why are these 3 things so important? That the law is better to be killed than to perform them. Because you have to have absolute values. If the world loses its whole value system, then what is this world? And so that's kind of what it's really stating, is like these 3 things are cores. And if we lose those cores, that foundation, we've lost ourselves. We've lost the values of the world. And so you have to have something that is a red line in your life. What is the things that I hold most dear and most important? So Judaism says these are the 3 core values, that if you lose the value of life, if you lose the value and sanctity of marriage, if you lose the value and sanctity of God, then what is this world? So that's kind of how I share that. So that's the answer to that. Now I will share something interesting, just a side note. I might have shared this here before, but I always find it quite fascinating. So what's the punishment if we were living in a land that the courts were Jewish, right? Where they actually could punish you for transgressing on one of these 3. Like you had the opportunity and you didn't rise to the challenge. Someone was threatening your child, kill that person or I'll kill your family. And so you go and kill someone. Or maybe they were telling it to you, right? You don't rise to the challenge. You actually saved your life. What is the punishment?
You have to live with it.
Well, besides for your own, that's true. That's a very big deal. But then maybe I should use an easier one, right? Because maybe I should do idolatry, right? That's probably the easiest one because, hey, listen, I never cared about that thing. I bowed down. I did a physical movement, so this guy didn't kill me, right? I'm not talking about harming another woman, which would have been in the marriage one. I'm not talking about murder, which we took a life. I'm talking about literally, I just bowed down to a rock. I mean, God knows I don't care for this rock, right? I use that logic. The courts don't punish. So even though you should have chosen to be killed rather than to kill, or you should have chosen to be killed rather than to worship the idol, the court doesn't punish you because in the end of the day, we acknowledge we're human beings. And so, like you said, though, you have to live with that, right? It is something that you will live with until you die. And now it's
There's something in your soul.
right. Yeah, there's always the spiritual part to that, but I'm talking about like in the world of a court that could penalize for doing something, they would not, because they understand that's a challenge for human beings, very difficult. You got to really rise to a challenge like that. So just a side note. Now your question.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know too much about the history of that, but you said there were 100 women.
It might have been more. I just use a figure. Probably not. Probably not. It says they went through the entire land and took the women that were of
The most
beautiful, I'm going to say in physical beauty. And then they had a competition. And it talks about it, like how they prepared them with the different perfumes and fragrances and for 7 days here. And then it was a very big, it was bigger than the Miss America or whatever. What's the other one? The Miss Universe? Thank you. It was bigger than that. And it was very different, obviously. Listen, just to put some context, Ahasuerus was the king over the entire world. So he wasn't just over like 5 countries or 127 countries.
He had a big harem.
Yeah, I'm sure. Multiple, right? Whatever it was. So it's like you didn't really have a choice. There wasn't a place to escape either. It wasn't like Jews will go to whatever country because we can. She had no choice.
Well, she did.
Well, yeah, to be discussed. Yeah, so the question is a very good question. There's a lot of articles about it. Like there's a lot of commentary on that. The short answer is that she was forced. And so we don't look at it the same way. There's choice and there's force.
Can I make a comment about interfaith marriage?
Of course.
So if a Jew and a non-Jew get married, the non-Jew can then feel, well, your religion is not important to you. I want you to convert to my religion.
Right. It could happen.
It could be the opposite. Yeah.
But
You're saying I understand what you're trying to say. You're saying that it could be seen as, look, you didn't care about that one, so I do care about all the other ones. You might as well come to my religion. Some of the interfaith marriages have nothing to do with religion, if you think about it. Like it's the spouse or significant other wasn't like religious to something else. They weren't Jewish. But if you're talking about someone religious, yeah, that could be definitely seen as
could be, start with it didn't matter and then it does.
right. That's true. Right. People change.
Yeah.
People become more spiritual.
Yeah.
To share something interesting that I always love this article. There's a rabbi in Australia who writes his weekly email is a question and an answer. And the question was a mother asking the rabbi what to do about their daughter who married a non-Jew and left the faith. And his answer was something that kind of a point that I shared earlier, which was, and that's one mitzvah out of 613. Encourage her in the other 612. And I appreciate that perspective tremendously. I read this so many years ago, but it's really the Jewish way that we're not going to bash you for what you're not doing right. We're going to lift you up for what you can do. I watched a really interesting video yesterday. So Australia had a synagogue that was attacked on Shabbat, maybe over this past weekend, not the firebombing one from a month or 2 ago. And the rabbi of the shul is being interviewed on Australian TV. And the woman who's interviewing him says, so, what are you feeling? So he says, obviously sad that we were attacked, and this is where he focused for almost the rest of because she was blown away. He says, also grateful. She's like, grateful. But before she asked questions, he explained, look how the outpouring of support, the people who came immediately and started cleaning up, it was just such an interesting perspective. And I said, wow, that's like, to find that, most people would say angry. You're just attacked for being Jewish. And he focused on all the positive that came from it, which is we can find that with everything. The question is what we focus on. All right, we could look at Israel after October 7th and be angry. It would be legit. We should be. But also all the people who have spoken up and have come forward to help. There are plenty that have not. So we can focus on that too. But it's very powerful to see that perspective.
Be grateful for the good things.
Right.
Look at the positive way.
So it was just an interesting, I think a good life lesson for me.
Mhm.
It's like, I can find that we can always look for the silver lining, but we should focus on the silver lining.
It's like the California fires. There's a lot of people they interviewed who said, they shared the tears, and now they're like grateful for the
Community. So actually I am on a text thread. I made an introduction. We have a cousin that lost their home in the Palisades. And I reached out to just another guy whose mother lives in Arizona. I'm like, hey, they live in LA. I don't know where. I said, just checking in on you guys. And so he said, a bunch of his friends lost their homes and they're hosting them in their house. And they want to do some sort of like a supplies for families that were affected. And so I said, my cousin lost their home. Maybe I can connect you. So because they didn't start a new text thread, which is something I should really suggest to them, right? So I don't have to get every text. But what happened is she is from a Chabad in the Palisades, and she was the director of their preschool. Yeah. So on yesterday, they did like a meetup for all the families that were in the preschool just to meet up at some jumping place. So on Friday, after I did this connection, they said, we want to bring supplies. Maybe we could bring it to wherever you're meeting. So she says, where? And he's like, oh, my office is in that building. But now the thread is continuing. That was yesterday. Now they're talking about more things. Like he says, what else can I do? Like, so it's very beautiful to see. They didn't know each other before, but they are connected. They're connected because they went through a tragedy together, but they're connected really because they're Jewish.
Yeah.
Like we had a federal law enforcement training group is using our campus tomorrow for 30 police officers to train them on risk assessment. Yeah, on risk assessment. Like if you're a police officer of a community, you can come to a house of worship, a school, a building, and say, what can we do to make this a little safer? So they're using our campus and they're using a school. They're doing 2 different places. So yeah, on Lincoln. So I'm speaking to the 2 instructors and we're talking, because we did a short walkthrough yesterday. Tomorrow they'll do it with all their students. And we're talking about differences between the Jewish community and let's say other faith communities. So I said, if a Jewish synagogue is attacked in Pittsburgh, the entire Jewish world gets nervous about their security at their shuls. I don't have to be in Pittsburgh, I'm in Phoenix, or I could be in Europe and I'm nervous because people hit our own. I said, I don't think it works like that with the Christian world. Like if someone firebombs the Catholic Church in Chattanooga, Texas, well, there's no Chattanooga, Texas, but Tennessee, there might be, but not that I know. Are the churches in Arizona worried now that someone's going to firebomb them? No, it doesn't work that way. And so he said, you're right. There were 2 churches in I don't remember what city it was. It says one of them got attacked. And the next door neighbor was another church. He said they never talked to each other. They didn't even have communication. I'm sure that's not a standard. I'm sure most people would have. But he's like, you're right. They don't see it the same way. So for us, like we have a large Arizona, let's say, community of shuls and congregations. If something happened in Mesa, the Phoenix ones are also concerned. But that doesn't happen in the church world. If a church is attacked in Mesa, I mean, the Phoenix ones don't react now with like extra security measures. It's just it's a family type of a thing.
Federation and everything's all connected.
Right.
Hadassah, they named for us, everything.
Because we're one. In the end of the day, we're one people. So which is unique.
Right.
Although you
Of course you can find.
you could say, because Jews have always been persecuted, and maybe if you bomb the Baptist church, Baptists don't know what it's like to be persecuted, so they might not.
So then let's talk about the Black community. They don't have that.
No.
When I lived in Sacramento, they bombed a synagogue. They bombed NAACP and they bombed the Chinese center all in one night. And then the whole community came together.
Right.
Because it was pretty much, they're attacking everyone who wasn't white. And
No, it is, but there is definitely something to be said that when whatever organization is attacked, you're going, and I think it's beautiful, where you do see that the colors, we don't have different colors. We're one city or one community. No, I meant like where people bond. So like in this type of a setting, like if you attack a group, other people who are not of your group come out and support you and say, it hurts us too. It's our community. We want it to be nothing to do with Jewish community. That's what I meant. And that's why I say different colors. Of course, we're different people and we are different colors, but we look beyond that. Yeah, no, not by race. I'm saying like, in the sense of like, if the Jewish community is attacked and a church, whatever it is, reaches out it's their community, they're hurt, right? You don't want that in your community. Yeah.
Regarding what you said about the fires in LA, I know that a lot of Jewish Orthodox people live in LA, I don't know what part.
Right.
but, I was thinking yesterday that I would like to donate Judaica items.
Right, to people who have lost. Right, I don't know the answer. I mean, I can give you organization names, you can find out, but that's a good question. In fact, like the last thread of my friend is shoes. They ran out of the house with nothing. They don't even have shoes.
Federation does that.
The Federation has a very big, I saw their emails for the,
Did
but
you-
Judaica is more unique. Judaica is more like, I need to know a family that needs now a new sitter.
Yeah,
Right.
nobody needs it. If you have something like that,
Right.
if people don't reach out.
Then they don't know, right? But that's an interesting, like, way of saying, it's like, I need to get my, I don't know about tefillin, but like, I need to get something, my house is empty, I'm moving into an apartment, I have nothing.
Doing what else?
Right,
Where they found an IKEA from the Holocaust, a Holocaust survivor had brought her on IKEA. And the house was on Altamina and burned down.
but the menorah was still
They
standing.
came, somebody else found.
Was it brass?
It was definitely a metal. I saw the picture of it.
It was black,
Yeah,
so I don't know.
Charged from the smoke.
Yeah.
but
But yeah, I think right now, that's a good but there's probably more urgency for clothes and shoes.
Yeah.
right, but you will come back to that, right? You need to have that. It's part of who you are. You need to have that.
Well, Shabbos candles if they don't.
Right. So yeah, these are, I think that you probably have to wait for the dust to settle slightly. It's like raging. So yeah,
Still, a new fire started.
they really.
The.
I feel like the websites I read aren't good on the fire stuff, like,
Watch duty.
and that has like all of that. It's crazy stuff.
People in Alex download that app, because it tells you about where the fires are and the evacuation.
Watch duty.
Watch duty.
Check it out. But yeah, a lot of the Jewish community though, just coming back, obviously Jews live everywhere, but if you want to talk about like heart of Jewish community is a little bit further away from the fires. They're more they're like La Brea, Pico, which is not near the forestry and hills. It's not-
Down.
I don't know, I guess.
More into the city.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah.
California.
okay.
Me
so
neither.
that-
Palisades is like.
Right, Palisades is on the ridge, which is why the
Ridge
fire,
Outside the city.
and now they're saying the other side, I think, which is called Woodcliff maybe, is where they're afraid is next. It's the other side of the ridge.
Is it north or south?
I guess it would be like northeast, I don't know.
The Jewish community is like in the middle. North of that.
But Pasadena also had a Jewish community that was,
Van Nuys is. Okay, so
It's south of it's south.
No.
did you live in LA or?
Yeah, I live in LA. Well, it might be southeast of the state.
Which they're protecting. Van Nuys-
But that was actually evacuated now,
It's, Van Nuys is kind of right near.
the Getty Center.
Yeah, southeast.
So
I don't know.
Saying it's not going to, it's not huge, so what's
Sa-
going to be huge.
right, Exactly, but although Santa Monica is close enough to hills too. But yeah, I didn't see, people are going to Santa Monica instead of,
But it's kind of like a circle, and then there was a fire that started in the middle. And I was talking to. No place is really safe. Yeah. if the
well, how are they
fire-
starting in the middle?
Yeah, but if that one spreads, then.
Then you're in trouble. Yeah, so but if you remind me, like, I could ask my cousin, like what she says or when that would be a good time to kind of start talking about that.
In LA, it's so built.
Right.
And like to find a good home for them.
Right, so Judaica, that's interesting.
Yeah, I was.
It's an interesting
I was
idea.
Talking to my friend who lives out there, he's so far north.
He doesn't.
Of the city.
Oh.
He's up at there's hills out that are around LA. He lives on the next set of hills.
So he's
So-
far from it,
So
but
far enough from it, but he knows people down
Right.
there. And if you're in LA, per se, LA, it's all concrete. So you're not gonna have fires. I mean, you can have a fire there, but not,
It was the wind blowing all the spark.
oh, the sparks, yeah, but in LA proper,
There's not.
there's nothing to kindle.
Well, they can't. You go-
Well, the houses,
Canyon or-
but yeah.
Right.
it's-
or canyon.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Well, you do need to have water to fight it. That's
Yeah,
the
you do
minor,
need to have
minor
water.
detail.
But they got an inch of rain last year.
Well, they
Right.
cut off the power, so the power lines with the wind didn't have the power to pump the water.
Yeah,
It
they're
became-
thinking of these tankers, it says it takes 8 seconds for them to fill. They just skim over the
Yeah.
ocean and boom. drop it
Right.
off.
You can watch videos of that,
Yeah.
different types of.
Yeah.
Any other, moving from the fire for a minute, any other questions that might be on someone's mind?
I'd like to go back to the, you were saying changing Torah. Finding out, where does it say that every generation should look at, how we interpret Torah? Is that in the Mishnah or the Talmud or?
I'm trying to think what quote that would be. That we should interpret Torah?
Every generation, huh?
No.
Give me the quote. I'm just gonna put that into Google, so yeah,
Okay, every generation
hold on.
have its own interpretation of Torah. I'm just quoting what my sources, from.
But
Study.
we practice rabbinic.
Well, hold on. There is something, and I'm not sure, I don't know this quote yet. I haven't found it yet, but there is something that says that you should look at the daily, let's say, Torah portion and find the lessons in today's living. That's very different than what I first understood you were asking,
We should look.
which means you're not reinterpreting the Torah. You're finding the lessons that apply to your life, but not about changing rules. So it's more like if I read the story of Joseph, there's a lesson in the story of Joseph, right?
But we can interpret it different.
Uh,
Every generation.
That's a scary word. That's why I'm getting nervous.
Well, this is our rabbi. We were in a conservative.
Well, no, but I mean, like, it could be that interpretations doesn't change how you act. I'm gonna take a second.
When they do that, it's like killing the whole world. To me, it's all of Los Angeles. It's the world.
Then we shouldn't have to
It's
sex
like
of different.
killing.
We shouldn't have reform, conservative, Hasid, Orthodox,
So by the way, there is a big misnomer when you talk about Hasidic, Orthodox, like that. In the sense of Torah, let's say we say the Torah is divine, which means that it doesn't change, right? Because God's wisdom would be ever present and all knowing.
Right.
So between, let's say, Orthodox, Hasidic, modern Orthodox, whatever you want to put in the Orthodox box, they're all agreeing on the divinity of the Torah, right? They might have different customs or ways, but there's no change in Jewish law. If you want to go to people, let's say, who start readapting or changing Jewish laws, well, I don't want to, without labels, I don't want to do labels.
Are we talking about?
Let's say there's 613 commandments plus rabbinic, right? Let's add
Okay, right,
oral tradition.
right.
That's always present, right? Some of them are not applicable because we don't have a temple. We don't have the Bet Hamikdash, but that's always present, right? So some of it you can't do today because you can't do it, and some of it you can. But then when you talk about what can be changed, the answer is really nothing, right? Because it's all from God. So interpretations might be how I can learn something in the Torah and apply it today too, but not to subtract. Not to say, oh, you don't need to do that anymore because X, Y, and Z, right? I'm going to give you an easy example of this. If the Torah says you can't work on Shabbat, how do I define work without knowing the Torah's interpretation, the rabbinic interpretation? I would say that what light switch, like what's the problem with a light switch on Shabbos? That's actually not work. I flipped a switch and there was light. Like if you told me to go light a match, there's work, there's labor, maybe, making a stone with that I get. But why would you have a problem with that, right? So we really have to ask the question, what is the definition of work or labor? So some of the reinterpretations are ignorance of what is the real law, what's it about. So I think there's always an important kind of conversation that has to happen when we kind of question things like, wait, let me understand the first part before I go to the second part. Or to give you a, but that's not interpretations, because that's understanding the original.
Well, okay, but what you're saying is though, is, the different, Jewish sects are interpreting work differently.
Well, I like how you say that. I like how you say that. I'm not arguing on that point. I'm going to rephrase it.
Okay.
Do I have am I allowed to, if I reinterpret it means I'm changing it. Right? If I say we have a tradition, the Torah's tradition, right? That's been given to us from Sinai, Moses, Jews have lived it all the way till today. And then I come as a single person and say, well, you don't have to do that. I'm changing something.
No, he doesn't have to.
No, I'm saying as a movement.
Oh, okay,
As a movement. That means I've changed something.
right.
So really in Judaism, we don't look at movements. There's the tradition, and then there were people who said, listen, we feel, right? They're not pointing to a verse that says they can do that differently. We feel that you don't need to do that anymore because whatever they use.
Like we don't sacrifice.
But that's not because we feel, that's just because we don't have a temple, and it says only in the temple can you sacrifice.
Right.
So in Shiloh, for example, when the Jewish people had their tabernacle in Shiloh before the temple, once they established a location, which was Shiloh, you were no longer able to do a sacrifice anywhere else. And then when they moved the tabernacle into the temple, right, they built the temple and now the altars were there, you couldn't sacrifice anywhere else. But before that, you can make a sacrifice in your backyard. So once the temple is destroyed, we don't have sacrifices because of that. Because it was one, they didn't make a change. We lost the temple. No, that was part of it. That was before you had a place to do it, right? Abraham did a sacrifice. Isaac did a sacrifice. Everyone was doing sacrifices. It was a standard thing. You had what was known in Hebrew, they called it a bama instead of an altar.
Sacrifices to the temple.
Right, but once you don't have a temple anymore, once you have no temple anymore, you don't have a place to do it.
Right.
So that's why we don't do all the sacrifices today.
No, I know, I'm saying there are certain.
But I know, but that's not a change. I understand what you're saying. That's not a change to a law. That was that we cannot no longer do it.
Okay, all right, what is something,
Kosher.
okay, so.
If I tell you that you don't have to keep kosher anymore, I have changed the law.
Oh.
But that's one of the things that we did. That would be one of the good examples. 613. That would be one of the good examples of a change that a group made. And so you don't have to keep it anymore. That's the Reform's platform.
Yeah, because our synagogue won't merge with the.
That's
temple.
probably because of that.
Just because of that.
In fact, if you want to just hear something interesting, even in the conservative movement, when they change things, I want to use that word. They have like a whole rabbinic kind of symposium of how they come to their conclusion. They write like a response. It might have come through a whim, but they bring it with text, right? They could be wrong all day long. I'm not getting involved on details. But the point is like, they didn't just say, we feel for anti-Semitism, you don't need that anymore. So they're kind of, I'm going to say, trying to balance divinely inspired Torah and a little bit of the modern, but they're having a problem with that too, right? Which is why the conservative movement is losing more people to the reform movement, because what are they trying to do? They're trying to make Judaism relevant to people who are less active.
Okay, what do the rabbis say why we should continue to be kosher?
Well, so hold on. I'm gonna answer that. No, I'm gonna answer that. They don't say why we should. God said so.
Right.
So I don't have to have an argument why you should.
Right.
What I can say is if you want to connect to God, the Torah is the manual of how to connect. And so here are 613 ways to connect to God. In others, I'm phrasing it differently. It's not do not and do. It's about a relationship. So it's all about the mindset. That doesn't mean that somebody who heard that and internalizes that is going to change their life tomorrow and start keeping Shabbat and kosher.
They don't even know.
But it will give them some meaning. Okay, wait, so every time I do it, I'm connecting. So that means if I had kosher, like I share here all the time, kosher on Wednesday, you're connecting to God in a beautiful way. And Tuesday you didn't have kosher. We don't focus on that part. But on Wednesday, you're connecting. And so each and every mitzvah, additional mitzvah that I do, I connect to God in a meaningful way. So it's not about focusing on the, what am I missing, and constantly being depressed that I'm not a good Jew. So no, I'm a great Jew. On Wednesday, I'm keeping kosher and I'm connecting to God. And say, and so someone's gonna come and say, what about? Well, we don't do whatabouts. Right? On Wednesday is a beautiful thing. And if I celebrate Wednesday, when I have an opportunity on Friday, I might do it again because wow, I connected to God through eating that chicken sandwich from whatever restaurant rather than going to KFC that day. That was a beautiful thing.
For me, when I became kosher, what it was for me was I was connecting with a community that was trying to survive the rest of the world. So, you know.
There's
you
something
give me
to that too, by the way.
Different.
But that's a beautiful thing too, right? You do connect. I like that. I hear that a lot, not just about kosher, but like when you do a mitzvah or you do Judaism,
Yes.
you connect to your family, your tradition, your community, and you're adding another thing. It's a survival thing. Like we're in a world that's just kind of trying to push us into the rest of the mix.
Right, and that's what I try to give my children, that
We-
we're not trying to be different. Being kosher, we're trying to, you know, connect in a community sense that is.
What happens if we are trying to be different? I'm just
Well,
curious. No, I'm curious.
No, it's because my kids,
No, I know what you mean. They're living in a world that's like, why are you
My
different than us?
6-year-old
Right.
a pig out of the.
Right. I know exactly what you mean.
It's like, Mom, I'm gonna eat a pig. And I would say, well, you know, that's not why we, you know.
Right.
And I don't, you know, that's not what we're talking, you know, you try to instill.
I know
in
exactly.
young people.
I agree, by the way. This is the biggest question all parents have. And I think we have the question for ourselves too, is like, how do we explain to ourselves and of course to our kids why we live Jewishly? And each thing that we do Jewishly, we have the same question. It's like, do I explain it? Because if we don't do this, then we're gonna be assimilated and we're not gonna be Jewish anymore. Well, that's someone's gonna do that, right? Someone's gonna do that argument, but that's not a positive argument. So at a certain point, someone's gonna say, I don't want to be part of that. Always against the trend and always. So like it's a tough conversation for ourselves, like to really give us the inspiration to do something Jewish and on a positive sense. So connecting to God, making an impact in the world. Those are arguments that if we do it well for ourselves, it inspires us to do another thing. But yeah, it's a constant struggle. Don't get me wrong. The most religious person has that struggle, and the least religious person has the same struggle. How do I make living Jewishly meaningful? Like, why am I here? What's my purpose?
To be a light to the nation.
Yes.
To be a light to ourselves too. Yeah. Final question.
Good time.
Well,
Yeah. So in Israel, when the state was founded, the culture followed, don't ride on Sabbath, don't, you know, all those.
Did it?
things. Huh?
Did it?
Yeah,
The culture?
well, buses didn't run on Friday night.
Okay.
all day Saturday,
Well, the Orthodox was in control.
when the nation was founded.
Well, I'm actually gonna find the middle between the two of you for a second. The culture of the state of Israel in 1948 was not religious, but it was very secular. It was actually anti-religious. But there were certain things that were maintained to kind of appease the religious, which was also why the draft, right, which was also part of the draft laws that are kind of archaic, was based on a small little Orthodox community. It didn't bother anyone that they weren't joining the army. But now you're talking about like a ballooned community of millions of people. It's like, wait a second. They're 1/3 of the Jewish population in Israel and they don't have to serve. I don't know what the real numbers are, but that's kind of what happened. So I think the Saturday kind of a thing was like a way to work together. But the Jewish state is not, it's very clear, was not founded on anything religious.
It's Jewish to the state.
Right. But it wasn't like based on Jewish values. Right. But they're the founders, for example, I always share this and then you'll finish with the final thought. There is a YouTube video that you can find somewhere that they go on the street and they say a quote and they ask a person, who do you think said it? They go to Jews. They are very anti-Semitic in nature. They are Theodor Herzl quotes. They are not taking Hitler quotes. And their point was, they were trying to make a point that he wasn't like a proud Jew. He just hated the Jews were persecuted. And that's why he said we need our own place. But he even writes that if he had the power at a certain point to convert all the Jews, or that all the Jews would convert to Christianity to get rid of anti-Semitism, he would have done it, but the Orthodox wouldn't follow, and therefore he had a plan B. And that's why he kind of goes back to the drawing board. So it is interesting to learn that part of the history. On the other hand, Theodor Herzl, yeah. It's a really interesting video. For me, it was eye-opening because I learned about Herzl in school, but I didn't study him. Right? You know, he was the founder and the founding ideology or idea. Yeah, but it was his like push. Yeah. So that was just an interesting. Okay, final thought. Remind me your first name. Phyllis? Parker. It was What was your first name? Marsha Parker. Got it. Go for it. Final thoughts.
Learn from the couple, what the real reasons for things are. And it can't hurt you, but people that if I'm not gonna turn off the light on Saturday, well, what if there's a fire?
That's okay. First of all, two things I'm going to kind of conclude with that. Number one is if someone doesn't keep Shabbat right now currently and wanted to kind of find something meaningful about Shabbat, I wouldn't say go all in. I'll tell you to start with one thing. It might be that you don't touch the light in your kitchen, right? It might be something small. Or it might mean keeping the TV on one channel, right? Where you're not going to move something that you show that the day is different. So I'm not saying you should go all in because that's usually not sustainable.
Yeah,
But
they put a fire on the stove.
right. The second thing I was going to say is that in an emergency, you do anything you need to. And so that means I've made phone calls on Shabbos, if that meant calling 911, or anything else that might be saving lives. So there's a very good quote that it says, live by these commandments. That's the Torah's text. And the inference is do not die by these commandments, which is why we said there are 3 exceptions to that, but none of them are Shabbos, right? Shabbos, so much so, and this will be my final point on this, so much so that it says to show that it's important to live in a situation where you have to desecrate Shabbat. Don't go ask a non-Jew to do it because then you're cheapening life, right? Show that it's important, that life is important. Therefore, I'm going to do the desecration, whatever I need to do to save that life, rather than get someone who's not Jewish, who's not obligated in that. So that's.
Comes on TV. A lot of people can't get to the cinema.
Oh, so the streaming. You were talking about watching Torah reading. So again, that's like for me, let's say you're doing that. Let's say that's your way of celebrating Shabbat right now. I would tell you that keep that channel on so you don't have to flip to that channel, right? One less thing. Is that the way to celebrate it? We could debate that all day long. I could tell you it's not, but this is where you're holding in life. Let's make it the most meaningful within. And eventually you'll make it that you'll be in a shul or whatever it is, however that progresses in a more meaningful and growing way. That's how we do it.
Thank you for another meaningful talk.
My pleasure.